Hi everyone, we are excited to share with you our presentation today on meatbag reliability. So what is meatbag reliability and who are these meatbags that we refer to? Basically, we want to talk about the human side of reliability. Yes, we are calling human meatbags. Do not Google this term, it is used differently by other people. So this talk is about how people working together, they form a culture and they follow a set of practices, and how at Zalando we try and encourage those practices to evolve. That said, this is a conference talk, so we called the human meatbags to try and catch the reviewer's attention, and apparently it worked. By way of introduction, I am Salomé, and I am the engineering manager of a team at SRE that provides monitoring insights to other tech teams at Zalando. I am joined here with my colleague Andrew.
G'day people. It's lovely to meet you all. I am Andrew, an engineering manager leading a team to improve the reliability of the transactional experience, which sounds kind of fancy, but just means the checkout bit. Now, within this talk, we will take you through concrete examples of how our reliability culture has evolved and kind of what lessons we've learned along the way. But to understand how that evolution has taken place, I think you need to first travel back in time to understand where SRE at Zalando started. Now, funnily enough, this was before either Salomé or I actually started at Zalando, but we did manage to badger some of the old-timers there and grab much of the story for you. The most important thing for you to know is that at Zalando, SRE started in a time of change.
So in the late 2015s, Zalando had a problem. Since 2008, Zalando has been growing rapidly, faster than any other European company in history. And to sustain this growth and meet the opportunities we saw ahead of us, we needed to change. We needed to be fast in adjusting our software and our business. However, so far, we have been struggling to deliver sufficiently quickly. No matter how many humans we brought, the problem did not get solved any faster. Now, something had to change. Seeing this need, Zalando decided to change radically. It called this change radical agility.
Radical. Nice. Okay, so radical agility was founded on these three major principles around autonomy, mastery, and purpose. To ensure that we had kind of these individual 5-person teams all collaborating together, we did settle on some design principles that all teams must adhere to. These are things that are pretty straightforward, things like using an API-first design, making sure that those APIs are RESTful in nature, shifting from kind of the data center, wherever it was, into the data center, into the cloud, and embracing the kind of microservice architecture. Now, this was a pretty cool and exciting future, mostly. It turns out to have some really sharp edges, and one of the kind of sharpest edges, one of the places in which we struggled the most, was being on call.
So before radical agility, the service landscape was small enough. We had 5 on-call teams, and they could cover the entire platform. Now, each team had sufficiently large rotation, each on-call engineer was responsible for their domain, and they understood that domain deeply. With radical agility, the number of services has dramatically increased. When this talk was written, we had over 3,000 registered applications. You can imagine on-call quickly becomes overwhelming. Luckily, that same year, Google has published a book called Site Reliability Engineering: How Google Runs in Production Systems. For Zalando, this book was a revelation, described a set of practices and a mindset that helped answer some of these growing pains. With this book and some perseverance over a couple of years, an initiative to promote SRE was pitched until eventually it was approved. With this out of the way, some very smart people started addressing the on-call and other operation issues.
Nice. So at this point, SRE is a thing, and we need to make a series of decisions. We have this kind of holy writ, this SRE Bible, and based on this book, we decided to have one SRE team per product cluster. Now, most importantly, the team had a separate reporting line to make sure that any of the feedback that they were giving back didn't succumb to, shall we say, the social pressures of the environment that they were in. We advertised for this role with some really kind of cool hooks, at least I think they were cool. Things like, are you able to design large-scale software systems, build and run them in production without too many issues? Do you care about reliability, and are you just a little bit too proud of your uptime? And do you enjoy jumping into somebody else's code base during an incident to try and help figure out the issue? By the way, if this sounds like you, we're usually hiring. You should check out the jobs page and take a look. Now, we found a set of colleagues for whom this kind of sounds interesting, and we used those colleagues to start rolling out SRE. We started with the traditional SRE tropes, things like service level objectives and service level indicators. We built tools, obviously, because every dev team needs to do so, and we ran these like reliability workshops to describe these resilience patterns in preparation for our busiest period, that is Cyber Week for us.
To kickstart reliability, delivery teams, they were put on call for critical services they owned. This has formed the culture that we still have today. You build it, you run it. SRE took on major challenges, such as rolling out distributed tracing across the entire organization, improving the page load time, and creating and staffing the incident commander role. SRE has helped to delimit applications through different tiers, to split them according to their criticality, and took a more active role in cultural spaces to share the reliability approach to all tech at Zalando.
Nice. Okay, so far we've chatted a little bit about how SRE has evolved since about 2016 when it started to 2019. But in 2019, the team was still pretty small. It had about 9 people, I think, in total. It's now 2022, and SRE has evolved even further. But in 2019, we get to know the story a little bit better. We were even part of some of it. Given this, we thought we'd kind of talk about how SRE has evolved through the lens of some areas in which, interestingly, we weren't very reliable. That is through incidents. Everyone hopefully loves a good disaster story. So without further ado, let's jump into that kind of unexpected learning opportunity.
So this example is called Sufficiently Broken. This incident has kicked off harmlessly, as frequently incidents do. On the 17th of February in 2019, there was a merge of a pull request in a fulfillment system. This pull request was incorporating a call to full service. A couple of days later, our customer care team reached out with the feedback that some customers in Italy, they were apparently stuck on the checkout page. At that time, it wasn't clear that this was a widespread issue. And with so many active customers, there's always something broken. Because of that, not much importance was given. Now, later that same day, the team responsible for the change in fulfillment system has received their first page. The impact looked like a spike in automated abusive traffic, and they dismissed the alert. 3 days later, the page was raised again, and the team has dismissed it again with the same reason, abusive traffic. 2 days after that, a different team received an alert and started investigating the issue. Initially, they had the same assumption, just abusive traffic. But they uncovered that the issue was coming from the food service. The change was identified and held back. Issue resolved. In the meantime, we figured out that around 2,000 customers had been affected. Now, after investigating, turns out that the abusive traffic was not quite abusive after all. Instead, some very frustrated customers, they were repeatedly and rapidly clicking on the button to proceed to the next step of the checkout. Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, okay. So now it would be trivial to kind of heap responsibility for this issue on the product engineers who actually shipped this feature or on the on-call engineers who kind of received that page and then dismissed it without too much investigation. Luckily, we're talking to an audience of SREs who all really truly understand the value of psychological safety and would never kind of go down that path, right? Or, okay, hopefully that's true. Okay, at Zalando, engineers are responsible for both developing and being on call for their software. That means that fundamentally these engineers need to make a trade-off, whether or not to spend time on something that improves reliability or some sort of product deliverable. Now, in addition, each team frequently has these services, these software products, exposed to all 45 million customers. And with that many customers, sometimes some of them do some really weird stuff. It's just not worth spending time to kind of fix a compatibility issue with like a 15-year-old version of the Opera browser. We really appreciate those customers who are trying to use that, but we have to make choices. And this kind of begs the question, how broken do you have to be to go and drop everything and jump into this process of incident response? Now, at Zalando, we've built a few ways to disambiguate that question.
So later that same year, in preparation for Cyber Week, a team of SREs has identified interactions that matter the most to the customer. They come up with a list of 21 different operations, such as view the catalog, add to the cart, place an order, among others. These were called the critical business operations, or CBOs. The SRE team has then worked with teams to instrument those operations with distributed tracing and with higher level management to set service level objectives on how reliable those operations should be. There was still the question of when an incident is critical, how do we identify which team is best empowered to fix it? SRE has built a tool called adaptive paging to determine which team should be paged. We won't dig into detail on this one since, spoiler alert, we had a talk about it before. You can check the talk Are We All on the Same Page by Luis Mineiro in 2019. So these CBOs, they tell us when something unusual is an incident. It is still our single best tool to determine when to undertake incident response. In the case of incidents like the one we described, the answer to does this justify incident response becomes trivial. Now is, how does this impact the critical business operation?
Nice. Okay, so we have adaptive paging in place, which gives us a way for many of the teams to understand if something is kind of sufficiently broken. That said, not all teams are actually part of a critical business operation. And even if they were, teams tend to have a hard time letting go of their kind of lovingly crafted per-service alerts and deferring to this kind of global CBO. At the time at Zalando, there was no difference between what we called an alert and what we called an incident. And the absolute vast majority of the time when an alert or an incident was raised, it was simply dismissed. There was no post-mortem, there was no customer impact, there was no kind of reflection on it at all. Most of these kind of incidents were really kind of service-specific behaviors. Some sort of host was unreachable or some sort of service has high memory consumption. Adaptive paging provided a really extreme alternative. That is, it alerts only when the customer experience as we can measure it is actually impacted. But there still needed to be a kind of middle ground in which people could leverage their own experience and their own understanding of their service to denote that something is actually affecting the customer, even without a reflection in a CBO. To fix this, in 2021, we split the process of raising alerts to raising incidents. The justification for raising an incident became not just, is there kind of something unusual happening, but is that unusual thing actually impacting the customer? And teams were expected to be able to understand and triage whether or not the unusual thing happening in their service was actually impacting the customer, and if it was, converting that alert or anomaly into an incident. This really nicely resolved that ambiguity between something unusual and something that really needs emergency attention. In the case of our incident, this allows those team members in customer care to really unambiguously communicate that there's a large number of customers that this really needs attention. And we can drop that response time to what it was at something like 7 days down to hours or even minutes.
All right, so we chatted a little bit about understanding better the boundary of incidents. This has been super useful to bring down our recovery time and allows our engineers to focus on their product deliverables. However, even if we had an oracle that told us immediately what deserves our attention, that still doesn't actually help us to solve the issues that come up. For this, we need a different approach. We can look at this through the lens of another, much more recent incident. This incident was especially a nasty one, however, a wonderful opportunity to learn. We even have chat records for it. We call this incident Learning at Scale. So this incident has started on May 11th of this year and had nearly the worst title you can hear at an e-commerce company. No sales since 9/15 for a certain payment method. Quickly gets worse. Someone notices that something seems weird with a shopping cart. Every time they click on a bag item, they get an empty cart, even if they had items on it. Now, someone else mentions that there seems to be high errors in the cart service when trying to remove the article from the cart. And orders are going down. Another service, calculation service, which is a critical dependency on of the cart service, seems to be on fire. Now, a different person pitches to disable the cart count in the header to try and reduce the load on the cart services. And after doing this, orders are back, cart page is available again, and incident is closed.
Right, so what happened? Well, we didn't actually know. It would take us another 4 weeks and another 2, thankfully, much less severe incidents to kind of figure this out. But I think what's most interesting for the purpose of this talk is figuring out how we determined what was happening.
For a long time at Zalando, we have been completing post-mortem documents whenever there is a substantial outage. However, these have varied widely, both in quality and in diligence. Now that teams distinguished anomalies from incidents, the weekly incidents went from around 300 to simply 20. This has allowed SREs, or principal engineers, to review a large percentage of all incidents, and this way to find patterns in how responders understood their issues. For example, focusing on a single impact of the incident rather than all its impacts. Focusing on the proximal contributor as the only root cause of the incident. Not investigating where time was spent during the incident, or another one describing a root cause analysis without justifying with data. So as a result of this feedback loop, this incident was documented in extraordinary detail and include both what we were able to discover about the issue, but more crucially, what we could not figure out.
Nice. Okay, so I'm going to spoil the ending. Basically, the issue was pinned down to a problem in the calculation service. Specifically, the Linux out-of-memory killer was killing it for violating its C group memory constraint, or the container memory limit. That, and we have a behavior that whenever a kind of new workload, a new pod comes up, we fade traffic across to it. Meant that we had these pods that were quickly becoming overloaded, reaching an out-of-memory, dying, and then cascading failure. Everything was kind of broken. But why was it actually running out of memory? Figuring this out turned out to be extremely challenging. We load tested the absolute nonsense out of this service, but it really remained rock stable. We figured out that the memory scaled kind of linearly with a number of concurrent requests that each given pod was handling, and we implemented this like really cheap limit to the number of those requests, but still the issue persisted. We had to ask for help. We reached out to our kind of community of experts in Zalando on the JVM, and they were amazing. They had a whole kind of host of different ideas. But it was really difficult to prove them, as we'd never collected the data they needed to validate their hypotheses, and the issue only materialized in a production environment. Now, it's kind of tempting to let it go on and break in production, but we'd given customers a really hard time in the past few weeks, so we decided to kind of give them a bit of a rest. The team built a tool that captures the heap dump when an application encounters a Java kind of out-of-memory exception and deployed it to production. And very obligingly, the issue happened again. Remarkably, the heap dumper didn't get triggered. Shortly thereafter, we figured out that all of that kind of sweet memory was actually being stored off heap, and a little further investigation allowed us to pin it to the HTTP web server called Undertow, nerdy detail. And we were able to fix it just by limiting the amounts of memory this particular web server could allocate. Awesome. All solved. It's been stable ever since.
So this was a wonderful discovery, but yet highlighted a painful reality. There are failures that are almost impossible to reproduce. As well, there was no model of a system for experts to review and to validate their hypotheses on failures. Nowadays, this is being corrected with the observability SDKs. So these SDKs, they are built on top of OpenTelemetry. They provide an opinionated set of telemetry out of the box. This allows experts to review a consistent set of data across many different applications and to leverage their unique understanding of JVM or other topics to this way be able to reason through system failures. It's still in its early days, but the SDKs are already well adopted. Around 20% of our applications are making use of them, and they are being used to solve real production problems. So the next time we have a similar problem, we will not have to spend nearly as long or as much customer trust to understand it.
Nice. All right, so we've looked at two examples of incidents that are really kind of excellent reflections of how we as SRE has evolved. That said, I think we should look at how SRE has evolved in kind of a broader context, stepping back out from those incidents. Now, in 2019, now this is just after the first but not kind of the second incident, SRE went through its single largest shakeup. Leaders within the Zalando community, including the engineering manager of SRE at the time, sat together and reviewed the functionality provided by all central teams at Zalando. And they identified kind of a common user, we call them the Zalando builder, and grouped teams around this user that seemed to be serving related purposes. So for us, that meant we grouped the metrics team, the logging team, the incident response team, and the SRE enablement team all together in a kind of single unit. And the engineering manager for the SRE team stepped up to take ownership of this new kind of department. Now, for the first time, this brought a whole chunk of the reliability process and tooling together. Now, moving multiple different teams behind a single leader and a single vision didn't go smoothly. Each of the engineering and product managers kind of had their own individual visions of what the future looked like for them, and they only kind of sort of overlapped. So to address that, we had this document with a very innocuous title called SREcon22. And from the doc itself, I'm going to quote you, so bear with me. The SRE strategy contains a brief historical context and explanation of the status quo to define the current challenges. It gives the SRE department clear guidance around which KPIs to drive prioritization and the general approach taken to optimize them. Now, for us, it defined a kind of North Star metric, which was availability, and key inputs, which were based on kind of reducing the toil and the incident occurrence, as well as minimizing the actual impact to the business of incidents. And focused on the department being both proactive, that is trying to evangelize a series of resilience patterns, and reactive, that is trying to focus on time to recovery. Most importantly, it defined that shared vision that each of the engineering teams now under that SRE department can contribute to. And that made the SRE department, for the first time, one department with one purpose and under one leader.
So while our SRE model has made tremendous progress, hopefully in the right direction, we are not yet where we would like to be. In reality, we will never be there. Whenever we get there, we just set our sights on more ambitious goals. What we are currently doing is working with our recently joined product colleagues to use the tools product management provides to identify, validate, align, and then deliver a solution to a builder problem. This provides us with focus and discipline, allowing us to solve problems at scale. We are even experimenting with one of the first things that we started with, embedded SRE.
So, SRE has been on quite the journey from its early inception in 2016, its revival in 2018, formation into a department in around 2020, and finally its current path of adopting that product-driven process. The journey hasn't been smooth, and certainly it's not over, but we'll be chipping away for it for multiple different years, and there'll be many more trials by fire. That said, the years pass anyway, whether or not we try and improve. We might as well try and kind of continue to reflect and prepare ourselves for the road ahead, as well as kind of join the occasional conference to steal everybody else's ideas. Hopefully, you're being able to steal an idea or two from our conversation today to help you on your own progression in building up SRE within your own organization. Or if you prefer, just kind of come and join ours.
We are only a small part of the SRE department and a tiny part of the SRE culture. We stand on the shoulders of giants whose work we are now shamelessly taking credit for. In particular, we would like to thank Luís, Thorby, Arpad, Francisca, Maria, Pedro, and Serbai, and countless others who I'm sure will find me immediately after they realize that we omitted them from our talk.
We'd also like to thank and appreciate those who are working so hard now and on into the future to ensure that Zalando truly does become reliable to be the starting point for fashion and beauty and kind of whatever else it sets its eyes on. That is Heinrich, Torby, still, Maria, who came and went, Christian Rocker, Christian Berg, and all of our colleagues within SRE who do the actual work rather than kind of attending conferences or meetings. Lastly, thank you all for joining. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.